Morning, y'all. Sun is still rising. It's not quite up. So, on the spot here, since I have an intern, and my morning coffee was about my beginnings, I wanted to ask you, how did you get into horses?
Oh my gosh, that's a long time ago. I actually grew up on a kind of like in between farms, and our neighbors, they had horses to work on the field. So they were all like, farmers, and the horses had to plow the field sometimes or bring the milk somewhere. So we helped on the ranches or on the farms usually, so we could ride a little bit, and we worked quite a bit for that. It was a lot of fun. We didn't know anything about horses actually. We just got on them and tried to stay up there somehow. But we didn't quit. Yeah.
So I'm curious because a lot of people that I see that get good in horsemanship, and what I call horsemanship, my vision of horsemanship, all came, like for me, back to my story, my dad was pretty hard, like yell and scream, very critical all the time, very critical. And then when he'd apologize, he'd make fun of you. So you're already mad and demoralized, and then he'd make fun of you. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until my friend later on said that to me that I realized that he was that way. But for me, and I always had a passion for horses, and grew up watching the Black Stallion and things like that. And then when I got my first horse when I was 10, we mainly got it for packing and hunting, but it was a pretty quick leap into the rodeo career and team roping. And both sides, the first horse we got for packing was an Arab, so it kind of had come a little bit from a horse show world where it was a lot of levers and devices and martingales to tie their head down. But then the rodeo career, especially, like we've done about everything from brain chains to, one of my friends, we didn't actually do it, but had like an electric shock thing to keep their head down, and longer shanks, bigger spurs, and make the horse do it. And then I got introduced to buck, and it was just like, this is what I wanted as a kid, kind of that partnership.
Right.
But a lot of people, not everyone, but most people, like Ray had polio as a kid, and one leg was shorter than another. And then when he got into horsemanship, he was very much a buckaroo, and they made fun of him. Buck has his past. Most people are familiar with Buck's past, but his dad was very abusive, where he feared for his life. Was there some trauma that you could share that led you into? Because to me, most people have that trauma, or was it just a love for horses?
No, it was a trauma.
And you don't have to divulge into what you don't want to, because I know it's on the spot. But if again, for me, this channel is about helping others, so maybe someone else would come and find help.
Yeah, it's kind of hard for me to share.
Okay. But there's
but
a trauma there.
There was a trauma, and it was a lot about fear.
And
it was a lot about fear about everything. And honestly, I wouldn't be here anymore if the horse wouldn't have been.
Yeah, I think me too, for sure.
And they saved me, and they still do it,
Yeah.
And I want to give them something back for that. That's the only thing I can do. And the best way to do that for me, I found here with you.
Well, and that fear thing, like I think about it a lot lately, and especially like for me, as I get closer to Christ, like I realize that fear is a little bit unbelief. Maybe it's flesh, maybe it's the world, but it's like, but there's a difference. I talk a lot, just so we're clear. There's a difference in common sense. I'm not going to go pet a mountain lion if I see one on my height. That's common sense. Fear, a lot of times, that at least that I speak of in fear, is kind of a perception. And sometimes we let things, because our mind races ahead too far, again, maybe playing God into the future, if you will, but false evidence appearing real. And like with the horses, a lot of times, some people, you know, especially when you're riding colts for the public, people want you to be the crash test dummy. They want their horses gentle. But a lot of people really at the end of the day are just like, hey, I don't want to get bucked off. It's okay if you get bucked off, because then a lot of them will complain that it's not going fast enough. As you learn more, to take those smaller steps and get that horse right and committed. And that's kind of why I quit riding a lot for the public and just kind of do lessons, because you can be involved and you can go. But I know for me, when I was starting colts, or back cowboying when I had my own horses, the one that would want to buck you off, it was really easy to push him and be like, well, I'm going to go do this job, so I'm going to take this one. This one's gentle. And I had to find, like, my first big realization after buck was, I had this horse break my ribs, and I was like, I didn't want to ride her. She cratered me. And the first couple rides were some of the best rides I've ever had on a horse. And the third ride, she broke my ribs. And so it was really easy to put her to the background. And I had to force myself at one point, I think it was around 60 rides. I forget the number now. But it was either 30 or 60 around there. I was 50% whether I got bucked off or I didn't get bucked off. Probably closer to 80 whether she bucked. And I kind of had to go back and go, okay, my whole thing is to try to not get her to buck. And I'm going to spend 15 minutes every day. And so now I teach a lot. How can you go to that next small step? And if the horse is troubled, the horse is troubled. And again, through my wife's rape, I try not to go too far into that trouble, because it's really easy for us to want to get what we want. We want what we want when we want it. But it's also really easy when they're bucking like crazy to go, yeah, maybe I don't go so far. But it still comes back to that kind of unsureness in horses and getting them more sure, because it's just as wrong, the ones to put up with it, to me now, to go through that spot. And it happens. You don't know kind of where the edge is sometimes until you've crossed it. But what have you found?
For me, it was kind of like, you know, when they do stuff like that, they buck, they usually do it because of fear too. So that was a very important part for me to realize, that they do it out of fear, and they have even a bigger fear than I do. And it helped me to overcome my fear, because I learned how to deal with it, or are still learning how to deal with their fear, or help them kind of do those little steps, and then they kind of help me.
It's cool.
But I have to be really careful to, you know, that line you were talking about. And every horse is different, and I have to face my fear every time.
Yeah.
But they show me and they tell me, and I do mistakes, and sometimes I go too far, and I figure out, okay, that was too much. But
I think that's some of the cool thing though too, our fear, because it's such a big animal and they can hurt you like that. You know, like, absolutely. I know people have their political beliefs after the documentary on the killer whale, but when I watched the killer whales and they quit interacting with them, the whales were like starving for that affection too. And I'll try to share a link below, but it's a really cool story of a humpback whale, and kind of how life treats us that way with this diver, and how God treats us, when what we perceive as fear sometimes might be the very saving grace that gets us to the next step. So without making this video too long, just kind of a brief introduction for a longer morning coffee. The sun is still not quite up yet, but we will pause it here for sake of time. I hope you guys enjoy the video. If you do, leave a comment below. Let us know what you think. Let us know about fear. That kind of seems to be where this one's leading. We'll kind of dive into it more on another video. Happy trails. Enjoy the journey.